Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, I am really pleased and honored that I can be here with you this afternoon. Yom Tov Lechulam. When we speak in Czech Foreign Ministry about Israel, it seems to me most of the time was spent discussing the issue of two-state or versus one-state. It is a very frequent topic. We have a slightly cynical saying at the Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs that it's good to know something about and deal with the Middle East peace process because you can make a living on it for a very long time. I'm afraid that up to a large extent it is true. The two-states endeavor is about 80 years old, having started in 1937, if I know, with the Peel Commission's partition recommendation. We have seen numerous attempts to bring the idea to life. We have not, however, seen major results. The numerous negotiations had a similar staccato. They always started with enthusiasm, which was afterwards followed by despair, rage, mutual delusion, and finally the post-negotiation blame game, which was in a sense already an overture to another round of negotiations. Too much history, too little land, and zero progress. I didn't have the chance to hear the previous speakers. I feel very sorry. Let me anyhow share with you some of my own observations, comments and policy recommendations related to the topic of the day. To start with, allow me a small historical reminiscence related to the Czech-Israel relations. As you are probably well aware, the Czech Republic, the former Czechoslovakia, was at the birth of the State of Israel. We assisted with its creation both at the United Nations and with the follow-up defense production deliveries. Our ties were painfully interrupted for over 20 years after the 1967 Six-Day War. But in 1990 we were glad to open a new chapter of mutual relations. And this year we commemorated 25th anniversary of the re-establishment of the diplomatic relations with a series of events both here and back home. A privilege of a good friend is to be frank and outspoken. We do fear that the Israeli-Palestinian gridlock will lead to Israel further losing sympathy and support of large segments of the international community. I fear that years to come might be really difficult. Since I was appointed the Minister of Foreign Affairs 16 months ago, I have had the opportunity to meet many of the Middle Eastern representatives and government officials. Last November I was here in Israel and in Ramallah. I visited Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Algeria, others. I hosted my counterparts from Egypt, United Arab Emirates in Prague. Looking back, I must say that our discussions were mostly dominated by the story of the so-called Islamic State. We were often talking about the developments in Syria with its dramatic scores of casualties and the refugee crisis affecting Syrian neighbors as well as Europe. Yemen or the ongoing crisis with regards to Libya and the tremendous refugee inflows from its coast were high on the agenda in the last 2 months in Brussels. I am trying to say that due to more pressing regional conflicts, the Israeli-Palestinian question seems to be sidelined for the time being. Nevertheless, in Europe it does and will stay high on the agenda. Let me stress that regardless of the ongoing fighting in many corners of the Middle East, regardless of the fact that borders are being redrawn or disappearing, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict will continue to be a major EU concern, and EU will keep on doing its utmost to promote its long-standing policy demanding the establishment of two states. It is a principle which has traditionally been also a building block of the Czech diplomacy. We emphasized in the past, and we are pointing out today, that we will not go for a halfway solution. The only outcome that we envisage is two independent states living side by side in peace and security. Unfortunately, we do not see this coming. Today I visited Gaza Strip, and allow me to say here that I really strictly condemn the using rockets and firing rockets on your country. But at the time, I have to tell you that when I saw this very large amount of unemployment in this territory, it seems to me that when I would be asked what to do, it seems to me that this big number of young people without employment and perspective is something which has to be solved. To give chance to these young people is way how to prevent and how to stop radicalization and extremism. And I hope there will be opportunity tomorrow to speak about it with Mr. Prime Minister and your politicians. Indeed, the general impression prevailing across Europe is that regarding the two-state project, nothing is going on, especially on the Israeli side. This lack of progress and inaction are way too frustrating and certainly have a potential to spill over into stepped-up criticism and even some explicit, rather stick than carrot measures. One does not need much imagination to understand that it will be Israel who will take most of the punches. Why? Well, the prevailing feeling within the EU is that Israel is responsible for the diplomatic deadlock and, above all, for effectively undermining any prospects of two states through continuing settlement construction. Having said that, I do not want to make an impression that it is all sunny and beautiful on the Palestinian side of the playground. The schism between Ramallah and Gaza City, which are run by competing representations, suspicious of, if not directly unfriendly with each other, has not been settled yet. Even if we were miraculously to achieve a deal tomorrow, it would not bring us two states, but rather 2.5 or even 3 states. As I stressed during my yesterday's meeting with the Palestinian Foreign Minister Malki, we, as well as the rest of the EU, encourage the current Palestinian leadership in Ramallah to actively approach and address the situation in the Gaza Strip. Until the inter-Palestinian clash is resolved, the two-state solution in its conventional understanding cannot be reached. To sum it up, the current picture is pretty grim. The relatively intensive attempts to solve the puzzle have been going on for over 20 years, since the Oslo Accords of 1993. The last initiative of the Secretary of State John Kerry phased out just a year ago. However, not much has changed in the course of the last 12 months. We have no reason to believe that all of a sudden the Israeli and Palestinian political representations will reach out to each other and agree on a deal. We have to keep trying, though. Personally, I am ready to contribute, probably not with providing solutions, but at least with providing the room. And not only figuratively speaking, room for talks. If those who are involved search for discreet and inspiring setting for their talks, we are ready to hold them in Prague. I do not know what comes next. At least I will share with you what I believe in. I believe that in spite of all the variables and insecurities, the game is still quite simple. The problems between Israelis and Palestinians must be solved by these very Israelis and Palestinians. The Arab Peace Initiative of 2002, once considered a complementary tool to the peace process, is given the regional turmoil and the upheavals in many Arab countries in standby mode at best. But I am convinced that also situation is changing, and maybe right now is more positive for Israel than in past years. I believe that a good beginning is the implementation of some confidence-building measures. On the Israeli side, these goodwill gestures must first of all include the freezing of the settlement construction, which we strongly oppose, and which is by far the biggest obstacle to the prospects of a viable Palestinian state. Halting the transfers of tax revenues to the Palestinian Authority does not help either. Israel gets harshly criticized. At the same time, it strengthens radical Palestinian elements at the expense of the relatively moderate Palestinian Authority. On the other hand, a recent decision of Prime Minister Netanyahu to shelve the controversial project excluding Palestinians from some of the buses coming from Israel to the West Bank is a good example of a step in the right direction. It goes without saying that the Palestinians must do their homework too. Their political leadership should speak a clear and unambiguous language in reaction to violent acts committed by Palestinians against Israelis. A vehicle running into civilians standing on the Trump platform is simple, clear terrorism. A quest for a peaceful settlement of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict must be on the Palestinian side, accompanied by an unequivocal and sincere condemnation of violence against the Israeli population. The Palestinian Authority should prove its credibility not only by political declarations, but also by concrete measures that would weaken the extremist forces thriving on the current impasse. The State of Israel is a great country. In less than 70 years, you have managed to move from a young, vulnerable nation to a Middle Eastern leader. Israel has every reason to be self-confident and courageous. It is strong. It has both technological and military edge over its neighbors. And above all, it is democratic. I am confident that Israel is in a comfortable position to take up the challenge, to be generous and take the lead. If you give it a sincere try, Palestinians will have to join in. If they do not, you will at least improve your standing across Europe and in the US. If you fail to advance, however, I am afraid that we will inevitably continue to drift apart. Our cooperation will become more difficult, and the sense of belonging and friendship will depreciate. I myself would regret such a scenario. All in all, Israel is not in Europe, but it comes from Europe. Something we are still proud of in Czech Republic, in Prague. Thank you very much for your attention, for having me here. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Lehitraot. Goodbye.